Welcome to the Explainer. So let's jump right in. If you live or work out here in the Permian Basin, you've definitely seen them. You know, those jagged little lines creeping up the side of a brick wall, or maybe a spider web of hairline fractures across a warehouse floor. Yep, foundation cracks. They are incredibly common across West Texas. But here's the thing, they don't all mean the same thing. Today, we're zooming in on the specific environmental and structural challenges facing concrete in Odessa and Midland. We're going to figure out exactly what causes these fractures, how to read them, and most importantly, what the heck we can actually do about them.
So we've got to start with the elephant in the room. Why exactly is the ground beneath Odessa and Midland seemingly tearing our foundations apart? Look, it can be unbelievably frustrating for property owners, right? You pour this beautifully engineered, solid concrete slab, and bam, just a few years later, it's cracking. Well, today, we're putting on our detective hats. We're going to look at the evidence right beneath our feet to understand why this is happening.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We are going to look at 1. The West Texas problem. 2. The culprits. 3. Decoding cracks. 4. Construction factors. 5. Structural warnings. And finally, 6. Repairs and prevention. Let's get to it. All right, Section 1, the West Texas problem. Okay, so our main villain here, expansive clay soils. See, huge chunks of the Permian Basin sit right on top of this really clay-rich earth. You can think of this soil like a giant dense sponge sitting right under your property. When it rains and that soil soaks up water, it swells up, it expands. And when it dries out, and we all know exactly how dry West Texas gets, right? The soil shrinks back down. It's literally like a lung, just constantly breathing, swelling, and shrinking right beneath your concrete. Now, when that clay gets wet and swells, it pushes up with tremendous force. We're talking enough pressure to actually lift portions of your slab. Then, the dry season hits, the soil shrinks, and it leaves these empty gaps or voids underneath the concrete. This creates what we call differential or uneven settlement. Basically, part of your building is supported, and another part is just hovering in the air. That creates massive, massive tension, which leads directly to cracking. Oh, and this whole destructive cycle, it's heavily amplified if you've got bad drainage or water pooling around your foundation. It is a recipe for disaster. And it's not just the soil. We also have to talk about the climate. West Texas is famous for its wild temperature swings. Baking hot summers that suddenly drop to freezing cold. Well, concrete is a porous material. It naturally expands and contracts with those thermal changes. So when you combine that thermal stress with the crazy soil movement we just talked about, the stress on your slab absolutely multiplies. Moving on to Section 2, decoding your foundation cracks. Just like a detective at a crime scene, you can actually read the type of crack to figure out what's going on underneath. First up, hairline cracks. These are those really thin surface-level cracks, usually just caused by normal concrete shrinkage as it cures, or, minor temperature changes. They're mostly cosmetic, but you definitely want to keep an eye on them. Next, we have vertical cracks. These generally come from natural settling. They're moderate in severity, but watch out if water starts seeping in. Now, these bottom two on the list, this is where the alarm bells should start ringing. Horizontal cracks are serious. They mean you've got lateral soil pressure. Basically, the soil is pushing hard against the side of your foundation wall, a lot of times because of hydrostatic pressure from water buildup. Finally, diagonal or stair-step cracks. You'll often see these following the mortar joints in brickwork. These practically scream uneven settlement. They are progressive and, they're very often structural. Okay, Section 3, construction factors. You see, a foundation's lifespan is heavily tied to the human element, specifically the prep work that happens before a single drop of concrete is poured. Proper soil prep follows a really strict sequence. Step 1, you've got to remove organic material from the subgrade. 2, compact the fill soil in layers. 3, ensure a consistent moisture contact. And 4, conduct soil testing when needed. If a contractor gets lazy, skips these steps, and doesn't compact that subgrade correctly, well, that soil is going to settle unevenly over time, and your concrete is absolutely going to crack, totally regardless of the weather. And of course, construction demands vary wildly depending on the type of property. Residential homes usually have moderate load demands and thinner slabs, which means if something breaks, the repairs are usually localized. But compare that to commercial and industrial sites. In Odessa and Midland, we've got these massive oil field service yards. They require high load demands to handle heavy equipment and constant vehicle traffic. We're talking thicker, heavily reinforced, engineered slabs. If one of these industrial foundations doesn't have the proper reinforcement, like rebar or post-tension cables to handle both that shifting clay and the heavy loads, the chance of severe structural cracking just skyrockets.
Let's get into Section 4, Warnings of Structural Damage.
So at what point does a simple little crack become a full-on failure? To answer the question, are your cracks actually structural? I want you to step back and look beyond the concrete itself. Think of your entire building as one big interconnected system. The concrete is just the base. If that base moves in a major way, the rest of the building is absolutely going to tell you about it. Here's a real-world checklist you can literally use right now in your own home or office. If you've got foundation cracks, start looking for these secondary warning signs. Are your doors or windows suddenly sticking, or maybe they just won't close right? How about your floors? Are they sloping or feeling uneven? Are you noticing cracks forming in the drywall or up in the ceiling corners? What about gaps between the walls and ceilings, or maybe some visible separation along the outside brickwork? And looking back at the concrete specifically, if you spot a crack that's wider than 1/8 of an inch, or one showing vertical displacement, meaning one side of the crack is physically sticking up higher than the other, yeah, that is a major red flag. You need to get a professional out there to look at that, for sure. And that brings us to Section 5, Repairs and Prevention. When it's time for professional concrete repair, the fix depends entirely on the cause and just how bad the damage is. For minor stuff, an epoxy or polyurethane crack injection might do the trick. Simple enough. But for real structural issues, now you're looking at slab stabilization or installing piering and underpinning systems to physically hold up the foundation. In a lot of cases, correcting the drainage is an absolute must-do part of the repair. And in the worst-case scenarios, you might be looking at partial or even full concrete replacement. The main takeaway I want you to remember is this. If you just run to the hardware store, buy a patch kit, and fill the crack without dealing with the underlying soil movement, that is just a temporary Band-Aid. Trust me, it's going to crack again. Which leads perfectly into proactive prevention. Look, you can't control the Wild West Texas weather, but you can absolutely control your moisture levels. Keeping consistent moisture around your foundation is your ultimate defense. You've got to install proper drainage systems, make sure those gutter downspouts are shooting water way out and away from the foundation so it doesn't pool up and swell that clay. On the flip side, during those long, brutal droughts, run some soaker hoses around the perimeter. It keeps the soil from totally drying out, shrinking, and pulling away from your slab. Also, monitor and seal those minor surface cracks early before water can sneak in. And if you manage a heavy load commercial property, do yourself a favor and schedule regular professional inspections. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The next time you look down and see a fresh fracture in your concrete, I want you to ask yourself, are you just patching the crack, or are you solving the soil? Because out here in the Permian Basin, if you don't manage the ground beneath your feet, your foundation is always going to be at risk. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into West Texas concrete challenges. I really hope this explainer helps you protect your property for years to come.